week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. I can certainly tell you that there'll be no doggy incidents this week. I can guarantee that. Yeah, so there'll hopefully be no interruptions this week. Anyway, seems like last week's episode went down really well, certainly with Global Whiskey Limited, who really enjoyed the show, and I think they were probably expecting something a little bit more serious to start off with, and then it all descended into complete chaos, which had them wetting themselves. So anyway, as you well know, I don't take myself particularly seriously. I mean, I take my whiskey seriously, obviously, but not myself. So anyway, that was last week. This week I'm carrying on my love-in with Waterford. I mean, you know, when Mark Newton, sort of head of communications, great title that, isn't it, for somebody that just talks an awful lot, kindly sort of drops in sort of not just samples but full bottles of their new releases. It's kind of like, well, have to review them, aren't I? And of course I know that Mark, or both Marks, are sort of obviously interested in what I think and what, you know, about their stuff. Obviously, if I say it's complete and utter crap, they probably just go, well, we're doing it anyway, which is kind of the Mark Rainier way, really, isn't it? But obviously, you know, I've kind of like, you know, signed up to what the distillery is doing, really, you know, I'm really interested in it, and, you know, by and large, what they're releasing is pretty good. So, kindly got samples of the two new releases, the new Cuvee, which is quite interesting. Well, the label is quite mad in actual fact. They decided to they contacted a blind artist and said, here's a recording of the some of the vineyards and, or not vineyards, some of the fields and what have you and the production process. Produce a label, and lo and behold, produce a label, which I have here. If you bear with me, I wasn't quite ready. Look at the state of that. I mean, that is quite mad. Anyway, just what I just told you was a complete load of rubbish, but to be honest with you, it's the sort of thing they could well have done, you know. They did actually employ an artist to sort of create this label, by the way. Anyway, so this is so that's the new flagship Cuvee, which is kind of sort of building upon the sort of concept behind, I suppose, the organic Gaia that they released, the whole thing about sort of blending rather than, I mean, because you've obviously got the sort of like the whole single farm origin side of that, but then, you know, they want to be multi-dimensional. They're not just all about sort of dirt and stuff, you know. They want to say, look, we can blend things together, and the whole concept of the Cuvee is taken from the wine industry and the blending of different casks, vats and what have you to produce an end product, and so this is where they're kind of getting at. Also released is the first of the Biodynamic bottlings that they're intending to do. This is obviously the Luna 1.1. Now Biodynamics, for those of you that don't know, is kind of like I suppose an extreme version of organics. It was kind of, the concept was created in the 1920s by a chap called Rudolf Steiner, a German chap, who back then was actually preaching about, or well, I say preaching, lecturing about the fact that, you know, if Western civilization didn't change what it was doing, it was going to destroy the planet. I mean, how prescient is that, you know? I mean, this is a guy back in the 20s was saying this. So he kind of created this agricultural philosophy, I suppose, for want of a better word, called biodynamics, all based around the movement of the planets and all that kind of stuff, and burying sheep shit in cows' horns in holes in the ground. Well, no, actually it's not just sheep shit, it's preparations. And, you know, he lectured sort of widely in the 20s, and it was all kind of wrapped up in sort of this kind of pseudo-religious thing. I mean, he was, not only was he obviously a scientist, he was a philosopher as well, and coined the term spiritual science. Now, whether you want to sort of buy into the sort of the that kind of pseudo-religious element to it. I don't think a lot of growers, certainly in the wine industry, kind of sign up to it, but obviously those that sign up to the actual physical principles of biodynamics are, you know, adherents of it, you know, and well, you know, whether you believe that that you know, biodynamics makes better wine, of course, is up to you. But having sort of, you know, tasted some of the wine made by some of the great winemakers that are completely sort of biodynamic, you have to say that there's certainly something to it. Anyway, I'm not going to go into too much detail about Waterford, because I've done the actual Waterford Distillery itself, because I've done a couple of episodes on the show in the past. So if you want a bit more information, just search for those episodes on my channel. What I do want to look at and talk about more is these two. This is hopefully going to be the first tasting of the of Mark's new Renegade Rum bottlings. As you can see, the bottle shape itself is kind of like an homage, or maybe a more modern take on the old Renegade Rum bottlings that Murray McDavid used to do. Now, the distillery, now, talking distilleries, okay, now it's relatively straightforward to sort of build a distillery at the end of the day. I mean, relatively straightforward, as long as you've got shitloads of money, an architect to design the thing, builders, you know, all that kind of stuff. You can whack up a distillery for a few million quid, or tens of millions of quid, and you sort of like go, right, where do I get my barley from? You either sort of contact farmers, or you go to sort of like a commercial malting company and all that kind of stuff, and Bob's your uncle, so to speak. Now, setting up a distillery in Grenada was a kind of slightly different. It was a little bit, well, essentially, you know, I don't know why in God's name Mark chose Grenada. I'm sure he could have picked sort of easier places, but maybe it was the challenge, I guess. So Grenada doesn't really grow sugarcane. Its main three agricultural produce is banana, coconut and nutmeg. And so there's virtually no sugarcane at all grown on the island. So, you know, not only did they have to sort of consider building a distillery, they literally had to start from scratch of the farming side of the whole thing. So they created a company called Cane Co. to basically rent fields, you know, rent farms. They had to sort of buy equipment. I mean, literally, I believe there was one tractor, so I was told, on the whole island, and it was at the airport, and it didn't work. I mean, I imagine the farming practices there must have been something out of the 1700s, you know, sort of, you know, doing it all by hand or by donkey or what have you. So not only did they have to sort of buy kit for them, they also had to sort of train or sort of, you know, get a workforce au fait with the growing of sugarcane. And no, if that wasn't enough, they obviously had, you know, a government, you know, and red tape to deal with. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting that Grenada is a bit of a kind of like a, you know, tin pot dictatorship. I believe it's actually far from that. I think the current Prime Minister is lauded for being quite sort of proactive with regards to bringing commerce to Grenada. But I'm pretty certain that there was difficulties, and certainly there was, what's the best way of saying it? A lot of people basically looked at this through the prism of the whole Black Lives Matter race issues, and obviously the growing of sugarcane is historically wrapped up in the slave trade, and I'm guessing that some people thought that, you know, here's these two white honkies or, you know, coming to our island and they're bringing back the bloody slave trade. I mean, you know, that's nuts really at the end of the day. But of course a lot of these sort of issues are not, you know, they're kind of like a gut feeling, I suppose. So, you know, you can talk to your blue in the face at sort of like, you know, plans and what have you, and the fact that, you know, this whole enterprise was going to bring, you know, prosperity, or at least more trade and prosperity to the island. But, you know, when they're seeing it through this kind of prism of race and slavery and what have you, you know, you're never going to change anyone's mind. But it certainly appears that they have indeed convinced enough people of what, you know, their mad scheme was gonna sort of work, you know. So anyway, on the other side of the coin, you can say, well, okay, they've got a completely blank canvas to start off with. There's nothing growing there to start off with, no sugarcane, so they could go out and you know, find all these different varieties of sugarcane. Now, I hadn't got a clue there was virtually millions, well, I don't know how many, millions is probably exaggerating, but there's a considerable number of different varieties of sugarcane. Should have probably thought about that anyway, but it's not something I did. So, I mean, obviously they had, you know, this whole kind of, I suppose, catalogue of different varieties to play with. They obviously then kind of matched up the variety to the terroir of the different farms, and you know, so you know they've got this kind of real blank canvas to play with, and although I believe that there was you know, a number of things like I just mentioned that were sort of trying, shall we say, including the fact that everything seems to cost a lot more money. I mean, have you watched Grand Designs? I mean, you know, you start off with a budget of £1 million and to build your house, and suddenly by the end of it, you know, everything doubled. And you know, that's in the UK, but I mean, obviously when you're building something in the Caribbean, you know, everything's got to be shipped in. If you run out of screws, it's kind of like, well, that's a couple of weeks wait until the next shipment comes in, you know, and it's probably by then it's increased tenfold, you know. So apparently money was a bit of an issue. I mean, they spent several £1 million on this enterprise, but it has resulted in a couple of, well, I think it's 5 releases in the first release, or again, kind of, you know, similar kind of concept to the Waterford single farms, different terroirs, different cane varieties, and you know, does the same concept hold, you know, of terroir within rum. I mean, obviously I'm kind of sold on the whole concept of terroir in whiskey because I've tasted the new make spirit. Does it work in rum? We shall find out. I mean, certainly, you know, I'm probably less sceptical about that because obviously I've tasted the sort of the white rums from Martinique, from Trois Rivières, and certainly they produced a cuvee called, or a bottling called Cuvee l'Ocean, which was obviously from cane that was grown closer to the ocean and would flood and got salty, and you could certainly take it. It was a completely different flavour profile to their standard white rum. So I'm kind of, you know, half sold on that one, should we say. But anyway, I think I've kind of waffled an inordinate amount. Like I said, you know, look up on the Waterford website, or the Renegade Rum website. You know, you've got the terrier codes and all that kind of stuff you can put in to find out, you know, an inordinate amount of information, more information you probably really need to know about the whiskey that you're tasting. So look them up, and you know, that they'll give you, you know, I could spend hours just talking about it, but I really want to taste some whiskey, so let's introduce today's lineup. Okay, so I knew what order to do them in. You know, I've got sort of, you know, young white rum, I've got the whiskey, so I've decided I'm going to do the whiskey first, and I've got a couple of earlier samples. These were given to me in 2019 by Mark Newton. These were 2 blood tubs, and I believe that they were filled, and they were sort of, the idea was that if you visited the distillery, you could at least try something that, you know, was possibly sort of, you know, a little bit more advanced than aging it in sort of the standard sort of, you know, American standard barrels and things like that. So this was Overture barley. This was organic growers spirit. It was 40. Well, the sample was given to me at 64.27% Overture barley, and it had spent 881 days, so, you know, almost 3 years, in blood tub 2157. Now the thing about the organic and certainly the biodynamic growers that they were working with, there's just not a big enough harvest to do each single farm. So the whole concept was to sort of, as you know, you've had the organic Gaia, which has already been released, and now we've got the Lunar bottling. It was going to be all kind of, all the barley was going to be sort of distilled together rather than each single farm. Second bottling we'll be looking at again was another blood tub bottling. This was the Biodynamic grower spirit. Now when we get onto the actual lunar bottling, you'll find out the makeup of the barley, but this was just purely Olympus barley. It was distilled in 2018 and aged, well, when I was given the sample, it had been aged for 330 days in blood tub number 8227. Bottled at, well, the sample was drawn, shall we say, at 66.2%. So hopefully this will kind of give us a kind of a grounding, a starting point to sort of look at, you know, the next two bottlings. Because then we're going to move on to the Cuvee. So this is basically 28 distinct Waterford single malts. The barley varietals are 36% Arena, 19% Taberna, 32% Overture, and 13% Propino. Aged 35% American first fill oak, 19% Virgin American oak, 19% French oak, and 24% Vin du Natural casks. Sample was drawn in May of 2021, but the bottling itself is 1,652 days, or approximately 4.5 years old. Bottled at 50%. Then we're going to move on to what they're calling the Arcadian series. So this is the Lunar 1.1. It's the Biodynamic growers spirit. 3 growers in actual fact. And wholly Olympus barley. So 35% again first fill American oak, 17% Virgin American oak, 26% French oak, and 22% Vin du Natural casks. This sample was drawn in May of this year, but the overall bottling itself has been aged for 3 years, 2 months and 1 day. Then we're going to move on to these two babies. I thought we'll do the rum last because it is pretty bloody pungent. So the first one we'll be looking at is the Dunfermline farm. Right, so this is pot still distilled. Obviously, as you may well know, the distillery is set up with both pot and column still, and I believe they have done a Dunfermline column still bottling as well. So that will be really intriguing to sort of, you know, see. You not only have you got the terroir and the cane variety, you've now then got the different still, which is one of the things I love about rum. So this has been distilled from, and now you'll have to excuse me whether I get the pronunciation of the cane variety right. Laclone red cane, otherwise known as B80689. God, information overload here, you know. So it was distilled in November of 2020, bottled in July of this year, so it had quite a considerable time resting. I'm guessing resting in tank, not in cask. Bottled at 50%. Then we're going to be looking at the Pearls farm, single farm origin. This was a completely different variety of cane, Yellow Lady cane, otherwise known as B89447, distilled in January of this year and bottled in June of this year. So I think this is going to be a really intriguing tasting. Certainly looking forward to the two rums. So I think I've spoke for an awful long time, so I think it's about time I actually taste it. Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Organic Growers Spirit. Let's see what the nose gives us then, shall we? It's a bit tight, not surprising, it's 64%. It's quite light, it's elegant, there's a lot of barley, obviously. Aromatic, sweet, slightly estery. I mean, it's got a purity of character, which obviously I wouldn't say is lost in the final bottlings, but it obviously doesn't have all of that American oak, all that creaminess. And like I said in one of the previous episodes of the show, if it had been me and I wanted the whole concept of terroir to sort of show itself, I'd just age the whole thing in refill American oak, you know, keep the oak down to a minimum, let the spirit sing. But of course they may or may not be particularly drinkable, so hence why Mark has obviously opted for the casks that he's opted for. There's a little bit of an esteriness, there's a touch of banana skin, there's an oiliness, but again, like I said, the focus is all about the barley. It's got a real purity of barley, and a little bit of minerality, you know, a little bit of oak. I mean, you would have expected the sort of blood tub, being a smaller cask, to sort of like, you know, impart a lot of oak character pretty quickly, but I'm guessing it's probably been, it's acted more as a sort of a fast filter rather than adding a huge amount of oak, because I mean there's a bit of oak there, but it's really in the background. So pass on. It's young, quite a lot of alcohol, obviously. Off the still notes, cereal, barley. The barley has got a lovely sweetness to it in actual fact. A slight creaminess. Now I don't know whether that's because of the variety, because it's organic, I don't know. But all I can tell you is that there is certainly something to all this malarkey. It's producing great spirit, which at the end of the day is all that really matters. Doesn't matter whether it's organic, biodynamic, grown by somebody standing on their head, you know, that's all to a certain extent slightly irrelevant really, because it's what is the juice all about, and juice is damn good. Little bit of vanilla on the finish, a little mentholated herbal note. I will put a little drop of water with it. Hopefully that's not going to make this episode of the show too long. We could be here for some time. Anyway, it's kind of pushed away any of the oak that was really there, and there wasn't a great deal of oak to start with. It's a bit rawer, it's more cereal than barley, but that's still got that sort of beguiling sweetness there. And yeah, like I said, it's a snapshot. It's work in progress. This is never going to be released, as far as I'm aware. That they have no plans to release these bottlings. It's purely a sort of a curio, I guess. Anyway, let's see what the powers are. Again, more of that raw cereal, and actually there's more minerality. It's an almost metallic minerality. Interesting. Touch of spice as well. Again, less oak, more raw sort of cereal character. Like I said, work in progress, but lovely work in progress. Okay, so let's move on to the Biodynamic Grower's Spirit. See what notes gives us on this end. That's got an intensity. It's earthy, peppery. But those tannins are pretty grippy, it has to be said. Now this is what I would expect from a blood tub. Not a huge amount of vanilla, but sort of a lot of tannin, but it's kind of peppery tannin. It's still quite raw. I mean, this is only what did I say it was, 330 days, so you know, not even quite a year. Raw barley, there's a slight fusel note there. Pungent, oily, cereally. It's all a bit nascent. It's not really kind of, it's interesting, you know, but it really is kind of like nowhere near obviously ready. Not that this, like I said, not that this stuff would ever be bottled, but it kind of goes to show you actually that really how intriguing sort of these little blood tub casks are, because like, even though this is like, you know, less than a year old, it really has kind of pulled out a lot of the sort of fusely notes, the sort of like the off the still notes, and you know, yeah, it's added a fair amount of oak as well. Now, if you kind of blended, if you were, you know, blending it back in with other fuller casks, it would be intriguing. I mean, but you know, this is why they sort of say, you know, smaller casks, faster maturation, when it's not really faster maturation because the spirit itself is still pretty young. But like I said, it's, you know, it's again an interesting snapshot. Let's see what the parts are. That's woody, that's tannic, it's a bit bitter as well. Not a lot of spirit character, not a lot of barley. The oak is very much as I would expect the oak in a blood tub to sort of be, you know, at this kind of early stage in its kind of development. Lots of pepper, but like I said, not exactly a huge amount of anything else. Again, interesting snapshot. Never going to be released, so it's not like I'm being particularly critical. Okay, that's kind of toned down the oak a little bit. I'm getting a bit more barley now. It's raw, it's quite oily. Again, it's kind of in its nappies, really. So it's very difficult to sort of draw any real conclusion from this particular sample. Anyway, let's see what Pat's like. Again, a little bit more barley coming through now. The oak is kind of knocking off a little bit, as is the tannins, but again, it's not really telling me a huge amount, to be bluntly honest with you. But again, it's lovely to try it, and it's always lovely to try something that, you know, is not commercially available. It does make one feel a bit warm inside. Anyway, let's move on to something that is commercially available. Right, okay, so first look at the Cuvee, bottled at 50%. Velvety, soft, quite a bit of oak. Maybe not quite as much oak as in the organic Gaia bottling, but certainly there is some oak. Fleshy, crunchy, Jesus fucking Christ. Right, okay, so let's take a look at the Cuvee. So bottled at 50%. Let's see what the nose gives on this thing, shall we? There's a fair amount of velvety, soft vanilla oak. Maybe not quite so much oak as, say, for example, the organic Gaia bottling, or the Gaia 1.1 or whatever it was. But it's moving in that direction. Yes, there's some crunchy barley. There's some apricot, apple, pineapple. There's some sweetness imparted by the virgin American oak. There's that winey VintergratA kind of sweetness as well. There's some lime, there's some mineral notes. I think they've achieved what they set out to achieve with this, and it was all about the blending, layering, the complexity that comes from all facets of the raw materials, and I have to say they have achieved that. It is a lovely whiskey. Initially, like I said, it does come over a little bit oaky, but you give it some time, you work with it, you realise there are more facets to this whiskey than what initially meets the eye. Yeah, let's see what Pat's like. Soft, juicy, quite oaky to start off with. More so than what the nose would suggest. I'm getting more of the VintergratA sweet oak. I'm getting more sweet vanilla. It's a very crowd-pleasing whiskey. You know, there is other elements to it. I'm certainly getting barley. I'm getting loam, and there's an irony kind of almost freshness to it. The oak is bittering a little bit on the end, but it's all really pretty harmonious. It's young. You know, the barley does come in towards the end, so it's, like I said, it's kind of trying, I suppose, to appeal to maybe the not so geeky whiskey drinkers that don't really want to sort of all this kind of raw barley and what have you. So hence a little bit more oak. It's a little bit more sort of inviting on the not that I'm not saying that the single farm origins are not inviting, but it's like I said, it's kind of moving away slightly from the whole terroir kind of concept towards a more kind of like drinkable whiskey. No, I don't mean it like that, but you know what I'm getting at. It's kind of like it's a crowd pleaser, but there is more to it than just the oak. Certainly once you've got beyond the oak, you certainly will get the sort of the purity of barley character, and yes, there is an element of terroir there, but it's not the kind of the be all and end all of this particular whiskey. So yeah, hats off. I think that's really impressive. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Luna 1.1. So obviously the same varietal as the Biodynamic Grower Spirit. I mean, obviously that's not really going to tell us an awful lot because it was just far too young. So this is, like I said, this is 3 years and 2 months and 1 day. But anyway, let's see what the nose is like. Right, okay, so it's youthful, it's oily. There's still some of that off the still kind of oiliness. There's a little bit of rose petal. There's some lovely juicy apricot. There's a little bit of red fruit as well. Subtle vanilla. Flint. Loam. That's really complex. So this is really kind of more in the area of the single farm origin bottlings. This is more kind of spirit based, is more terroir, less oak. I mean, there is some oak there. There is a little bit of vanilla. But the French oak is probably slightly more noticeable given that it is a slightly bigger component, and like I said, I'm getting a slight red fruit kind of note. Not big, but there is a sort of an element there. But this is, like I said, more towards the sort of the terroir bottlings of the single farm origin, and yeah, I like this. This is good. Let's see what the pass on. That's really mineral, it's flinty, almost to the point of austerity. Now, is that the Biodynamic Growers Barley? Well, it has to be. What else could it be, you know? It's really mineral. The oak is really quite subtle, and like I said, this is more in the style of the single farm origin. So a little bit of vanilla, still quite young, there's a little bit of an off the still note there. But I personally think it's really drinkable. I mean, there have been one or two of the single farm origin bottlings that I thought were probably bottled a little too soon. Maybe it was, you know, the economics of the whole system was sort of, I said, well, we need to get more bottlings out. I don't know. But it certainly felt that one or two of them would probably could have done with a little bit longer. This, I think, is just, I mean, the mouthfeel is incredible. It really is alive and tingling. Intensity is just absolutely stunning. And like I said, it's so minerally, it's so almost austere and finish. But there's sweet barley there. There's a little bit of oak as well, just balancing it all up. I mean, that is, yeah, Biodynamic Grower Spirit. Hats off to that, I think. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Renegade Rum. So this is this bottling, the Dunfermline farm. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Ooh, Jesus Christ. I mean, no shortage of intensity there, I can tell you. It's really high toned, it's intense, it's fusel, it is pure crushed cane. Now, one of the interesting things that Mark said to me was that the distillery has been built like a whiskey distillery, i.e. pristinely clean. And those of you that know about rum will know that a lot of rum distilleries are essentially corrugated iron shacks. They were kind of an afterthought. They were sort of bolted onto a plantation, and part of the appeal of the particular rums, you know, Hampton for example, you know, seriously funky bacteria. You know, I mean, you know, these distilleries are not particularly clean, and it adds to the character of the rum. Whereas this, the whole idea was like almost keep it pristinely clean, and we get, you know, pristine cane character, and well, yeah, without any clutter, and certainly they've achieved that. There's a bit of earth, a bit of rubber. There's a almost toastiness kind of coming through as well. It's an intriguing nose. It's kind of, it's raw, it's unapologetic, it's quite fusel. It's certainly going to grab you by the whatsits. But there is a little bit of a sweetness there, a cane sweetness there, right, and it just in the background. I think this is going to be interesting to see how this develops. But you know, it's raw. Let's see what the balanced like. Clean, raw, intense, pure sugarcane, earthy. It's not particularly sweet. It's almost minerally. It's or there's a touch of agricole, that sort of herbally agricole note, but it's not as pronounced as say something from Martinique, which kind of reeks of that sort of almost herbal medicinal character. It's a subtle medicinal character there, and it makes me wonder whether I was always under the impression that, you know, that basically the cane was sort of, you know, pulped, and that was the agricole character came from that. Maybe there's more to the agricole character than just purely the cane. Maybe bacteria does play a character in forming that style, because although this has an element to it, it's not the kind of like in the forefront, if you see what I mean. It's got a kind of sort of almost kind of mezcal-y kind of pulped white fruit finish. It's not an easy drink, I will give you that. It's challenging, it's fun. It's probably not something I'm going to want to drink all of the time, but yeah, I think it sets out, achieves what that they were aiming to achieve, and yeah, I'm pretty impressed with that. Okay, so this is the Pearls Farm, different variety, the Yellow Lady. Let's see what this is going to give us then, shall we? I mean, that is intense. I mean, that is, if you thought that was intense, this is off the scale. I mean, it is, you know, eye-wateringly fusel. Again, a little bit of herbal sort of agricole character, not getting the sweetness of cane or cane sugar that I certainly got with the Dunfermline bottling, and it doesn't feel as complex. It's a little bit one-dimensional in that it's just fusel and it's intense. So pass on. Actually, the palate is less fusel, less raw. Yes, it's got more kind of sugarcane character. There's almost a touch of tropical fruit as well. It's not quite there yet. It's latent tropical fruit. And this just goes to show how the different varieties of cane have produced different types of spirit. It's just quite unique, really. There's a subtle earthiness to it. It's got quite a mineral, almost salty finish. Now I can't remember where the where the farm is in relation to the sea in this one, but it got a real saltiness to it. Maybe it is close to the sea, but you'll find out if you go on the Renegade Rum website. Each bottling has a a code. They call it the cane code, and you get all the same information that you do about Waterford. You know, all the varietals and all the more information you probably really need. It's probably not quite so complex. But yeah, again, it goes to show that there is certainly something to A, this different varietal business, and B, this terroir business, certainly in rum. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see how these progress once they've got some, you know, oak aging under their belt. And the thing with the rum is they could take it in a myriad of directions. Again, you could have single farm bottlings, you could have multiple bottlings, you could have organic, biodynamic bottlings, whether they're following that kind of thing on Grenada, I have no idea. So, you know, the world to a certain extent is their oyster, and I think, you know, the initial bottlings are intriguing, and, you know, I think it's only going to sort of get better with time. So, yeah. Good stuff. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Firstly, a big thank you to the two Marks, to Mark Newton and Renegade, for the samples for today's episode of the show. Yeah, very much appreciated. Hopefully, you know, you enjoyed my review of your spirits, and I think. Well, I don't know, I haven't actually looked, but I'm guessing that this may well be the first YouTube review of the Renegade Rum bottlings, because certainly they don't seem to be out and about just yet. I know that they're sort of in transit, I guess is probably the best way of describing it. Anyway, so the two sample blood tub bottlings, well, certainly I think the Organic Grower Spirit was kind of gave us an interesting insight into again the character of the spirit, but then we kind of knew, I suppose, to a certain extent what we were going to get and what we were expecting. But it's just interesting to see without the sort of all the American oak, and you know, and like I said, you know, and the Vin de Naturel oak as well. But like I said, for a blood tub, quite restrained on the oak, and actually really quite nice. The Biodynamic Grower Spirit, well, it's difficult to really tell anything at all from that particular sample, as it was pretty young at the end of the day, and as I would have expected a blood tub to be. Lots and lots of oak, lots of vanilla, well, probably not so much vanilla, but a lot of tannin anyway, and so it didn't really kind of tell us an awful lot, to be fair, but again, sort of like quite intriguing. The Cuvee, yeah, I mean, that's a nice bottling, like I said, leading on really from the sort of like the organic Gaia, insofar that probably a little bit more about the sort of the oak and the assemblage, I suppose, than the sort of inherent terroir characteristics of the barley. And yeah, it's just sort of something slightly different. It's right, you know, I suppose because Waterford, you know, made it, I wouldn't say made a big issue, but because the whole concept of Waterford was about looking at terroir, it's always going to be sort of thought of as that kind of distillery, where in actual fact it's a bit of a multi-headed hydra, I suppose. Into fact, yes, there is the terroir element and the varietal element to kind of look at, but there's also the sort of the blending element as well, the fact that, you know, we are producing a whiskey that is drinkable, and we are, you know, trying to create flavours from sort of, you know, the barley, the sort of distillation process, and the maturation as well. So it's, you know, you're not a case of overlooking the fact that, you know, it is a distillery, just essentially just like any other distillery. The Biodynamic Luna 1.1, again, yes, a lovely bottling, more about the character of the barley and the terroir than the sort of the oak, and again, just an all-round lovely bottling. And I think if either of these two are certainly available in your marketplace, and you know, they're not going to be cheap, but they could be a damn sight more expensive than what they actually are. Certainly worth looking at, certainly worth checking out, or just pick up one of the other bottlings in the range. And then on to the Renegade Rum. Well, I think this is, I wouldn't say kind of like for die-hard white rum aficionados, but certainly I think the market for this is narrower than the market for aged rum. Certainly from, you know, the conversations I've had with people anyway, they find white rum a little bit difficult, not necessarily to deal with, but what do you do with it, I suppose. You know, if you're a white spirit aficionado, then fine, you know, you're probably going to really get into it. But a lot of people that buy white rum are buying it as a kind of a, you know, a cocktail basis. And I must admit, I'm not, as you well know, a cocktail aficionado, so I don't know how these would work in a cocktail. I mean, they are very intense, they have a very distinctive character, and sometimes I think, you know, for cocktails, they don't really want a flavourful spirit, they just want a bit of alcohol. So I don't know, but I mean, again, putting that aside, they certainly work from a varietal standpoint. There is a distinct difference between the two, with the Dunfermline bottling from La Clone Red and the Pearls Farm from Yellow Lady varietal. There is a distinct difference, so certainly I think that they are onto something here, and I think it would be interesting to see how the Renegade Rums develop. You know, will will they start playing around with a broad palette of different casks? Will they stick to American oak? Who knows? I certainly don't know. I think the only person that probably knows is Mark Grenier, that is. And yeah, I think it's going to be something worth keeping an eye on. And you know, certainly if you're into your white rum, certainly worth picking up a bottle, and if it's available, like I say, in your locale. Anyway, I think that's enough waffling for today. It's a bit of a long episode of the show, and I know people get a little bit bored of the longer episodes, but I think, you know, it kind of warranted a bit of extra time, shall we say. So until next week, good dramming and good afternoon.